Hello everybody, we are continuing on with our What Could Have Been series where we look at alternate hockey history, had things going a little bit differently, and today we'll be covering the 1980s Philadelphia Flyers. Before we do that, please make sure to join the Hockey Brigade by subscribing if you're new. Now let's get to the video. So, starting off, let me explain why I'm picking the Flyers for this decade. The reason for that is really simple. They were the team that was affected the most for this decade due to playing against dynasties in the Stanley Cup Finals. The other team you could probably argue for would be the Calgary Flames because they, unfortunately for them, played in the Smythe division with the Wayne Gretzky-led Oilers in that time, and they lost 3 times in the playoffs in the 80s to the other Alberta team. But regardless, I had to go with Philly because they went 0-3 in the finals, that being 1980, 1985, and 1987. So, with that out of the way, let's change hockey history. This means we'll be changing the 1980 Stanley Cup Finals, which was the first of 4 straight titles for the New York Islanders and their extremely talented team. If I'm being honest, I think one of the main reasons off the ice as to why the Islanders were able to beat this really, really good top-seeded Flyers team is just desperation. The Islanders had a very talented team in the late 70s, but they had a lot of playoff disappointment, and some wondered if there would be some roster moves made to try to make this team either a good contender or maybe go in a different direction with the team. And as you can see, definitely, the Islanders were a dynasty in the early decade, led by legendary Dennis Potvin. They had 5 Hall of Fame players, and even with that talent, like I said, there was some disappointment in the late 70s with them. But, as we can see, they kept this group together and they won 4 Stanley Cups. Luckily for this video, though, alternating history is fairly easy because we're able to do so. And a big thing right here, just flip the 4-3 OT result of Game 1 where the Islanders won and instead give that win to the Flyers, giving Philly a 1-0 series lead. Then we keep Games 2 through 5, all those results the same, leading to a Game 6 where Philly wins 5-4 in overtime instead of the Islanders, which means they capture what would have been their 3rd Stanley Cup in franchise history and their 1st since 1975. All the while pushing off the Isles dynasty for at least probably another year. Maybe it never happens. I doubt that, though. I at least think they would win 1 or 2 cups with that. So, yeah. Winning in 1980 was also given franchise icon Bobby Clarke another ring as he played till 1984, and it would have been another accolade in his storied career. Interestingly enough, the Flyers went the farthest against Islanders in the 4 years that the Long Island team made it to the finals and won all those championships. They even swept the Wayne Gretzky-led Oilers in 1983. Not a lot of people probably remember that. Now, speaking of the Oilers, we have to move on to 1985. And this was a really deceiving series because the Oilers win in 5 games. So you're thinking, okay, it's a bloodbath. But Philly wasn't really out of the mix except for Game 5 when they lost 8-3. And for this series, we'll just say Philly flips the 3rd game of the series and they win 4-3 instead of being on the losing end, and they take a 2-1 series lead after 3 games. And for the sake of the video, we'll say that they end up holding on to a 3-1 lead they had in Game 4 of the series and take a 3-1 series lead. I'm not going to say they won it in 5 games. We'll say 6 or 7. Really doesn't matter because 1987 is the one that I really wanted to focus on here. Setting up the interesting rematch, which, like we said, 2 years later after 1985 would be 1987. And this series it went the distance. It was a 7 games series, and it was a fight for these 2 teams. And since it went to 7 games, there are a lot of things we could change before this to make this wrap up a little bit early for a Philly win. But I'm going to say that we're not changing any of that. We're just going to keep it to where it goes. 7 games. Edmonton was probably one of, if not the best teams of all time. And they already had plenty of Stanley Cup Finals experience leading up to the 87 Finals. And again, it's just going to go to the distance. You have a team that was in their prime. I'm not going to say they get beat early from Philly. But in the final game, the Flyers did end up taking a 1-0 lead in real life. We're going to say that they hold on to that. Well, we're not going to say it's a 1-0 shutout, but we say that they hold on to a lead and finish undefeated in the finals in this decade. So, to recap, what is the difference in the legacy for the Flyers? What would that be for them? The difference would be staggering, not only for the players, but for the franchise and the city. The Flyers have gone 0-6 since their back-to-back titles in the mid-70s. And with every year the drought continues, it's harder and harder for Flyers fans to deal with. And Philly in general, this is not a team that has had a ton of championship success as of late. You had the '08 Phillies and then the 2017 Eagles, but still, in this alternate timeline, the franchise would have 5 banners instead of 2, and their most recent title would be 1987 instead of 1975, which would be tough but a lot more bearable. You think back and you think, wow, it has been a really long time, almost 50 years since the Flyers last won a Stanley Cup. 1987 is a lot better. Big name players specifically would be beneficial or beneficiaries of this. Bobby Clarke, like we mentioned, Bill Barber would get a good send-off to the back end of their careers because I think they both stopped playing in '84. And other players like Tim Kerr, Markel, son of Gordie Howe, would get at least the cup that they deserved in the city of brotherly love because they both spent quite a long time there as well. And you'd also have to wonder, this is a really interesting alternate part of this, whether or not Mike Keenan, if you know who Mike Keenan is, would have never won a cup with the New York Rangers in 1994 if we alternate history here. Considering in this alternate timeline, he would have won 2 cups with Philly in 1985 and then 1987, but considering how, Keenan back in the day, especially I would imagine late 80s, and then that early 90s, he was as friendly as barbed wire, so I don't think he would stick around in Philly too long, but it is fun to imagine how long would he been able to stay there had he won in 85 and 87, and then would that affected that 94 Rangers team. Interesting enough, it probably would, because you think that Messier, Gretzky, all that stuff, where it's going on, Messier ended up on the Rangers, so it's just kind of like another wormhole that you'd have to jump on down in. But it is fun. As for the total outlook, Philly would definitely look to be a great team. They started in 1967, and by 1987 they would have 5 cups. And ironically, though, with all that and them being one of the best expansion teams at that point, I still don't think they'd be the team of the decade. That would probably go to the Islanders still, because they would have won 3 finals in a row, assuming the timeline stays the same from 81 to 83. And even if you take away that 1980 title, for Philly, winning 3 in a row would be more impressive than winning 3 times from 80 to 87, which is weird to think about because that's kind of the point of the series in general, is just saying, would they have been the team of the decade? How would their legacy have been different? Yeah, it would have been totally different, but I still consider New York the team of the decade, assuming that the Flyers would have beat the Edmonton Oilers in 85 and 87. So that's all for today's video. Make sure that you liked the video if you enjoyed it, and hopefully you join me again for the next part of this series of what could have been, and we're going to be covering a team from the 90s. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you are new to the channel and enjoy hockey content. I don't just cover alternate history, I do news as well, and then just kind of opinion-based stuff. Everybody stay safe, have a great night, you go love hockey, alright? Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.